I had been at the small software firm for 8 years when everything stopped feeling steady. My name is Mark Allen. I grew up outside Dayton, and by the time I was 40, I managed product for a company that built scheduling tools for hospitals. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the mortgage and let me sleep at night. Routine suited me. I liked knowing what the week would look like before Monday morning. On a Tuesday in late March, my boss, Claire, called me into her office and closed the door. She didn't look at me the way she used to. There was a distance in her face, like someone who'd rehearsed a speech. "Mark, we need to talk about the Carter account," she said. I already knew the Carter account. It was our biggest client, and for months we'd been trying to keep their new contract on the table. I pulled out the chair and waited. "There's an issue with billing," Claire said. "Someone on your team adjusted invoices without authorization. Carter is asking for an audit. They're saying your team billed them for features they never received." I named off the engineers who worked under me. Claire nodded. "Security found an IP used for the changes. It traced back to a computer in your office." She pushed a printout across the desk. The server logs timestamped with my login ID tied to the actions. I felt my mouth go dry. "How did that happen?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "But until we figure it out, I'm putting you on leave. HR will follow up." They put me on administrative leave that afternoon. HR handed me a folder and a non-disparagement form. I packed my laptop, my notebooks, the framed photo of my daughter on my desk, and walked out past people who pretended not to look at me. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself someone must have used my credentials, but the printout in Claire's office had my username. It looked damning. That night I sat at the kitchen table while my wife Jenna made dinner and moved around me with the kind of careful silence couples develop when something is wrong but not yet named. We didn't argue. There wasn't a script for this. The charge sheet said potential fraud. The Carter account had lost more than $20,000 in billing credits. The client had demanded explanations. I thought about the meetings I'd run last month, the long nights when I fixed bugs and stayed to answer calls. I thought about the person who had the most to gain if Carter walked away. "Do you remember when Dave switched to sales?" I asked Jenna. Dave Walcott had been my lead engineer until he left for a promotion in the new business team 2 months earlier. He'd been good at convincing people our roadmap was worth paying for. He'd also been the only person who knew every workaround in our system. Jenna looked at me over the cutting board. "Do you think he did it?" she said, not because she believed it, but because asking the question gave her something to hold on to. I couldn't prove anything yet. I wasn't the kind of man who broke down publicly. I called my friend Lewis, who still had access to the network as a contractor, and asked him to pull raw logs, not the HR printout but the detailed traces. He did it quietly that night. At 2 in the morning, he texted me a link to a dump and a short message. "Look at the gateway hops. Something's off." I opened the log and went line by line. The timestamps matched the HR printout. The connection came from within the office subnet, but the gateway IP was unusual. It routed through a small hosted server I didn't recognize. I followed the trail and found an outbound SSH key in a temp folder that used a comment with Dave's initials. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread. By sunrise, I had more than suspicion. I had a copied set of logs, a screenshot of the SSH key, and an email I pulled from the team folder where Dave asked for credentials to triage a rollback the week before the billing hits. He'd sent that to Claire with a terse note. "Doing this for Carter. They'll thank us later." Claire's reply was a single line: "Make it quick." I read the exchange twice. My head moved faster than my breathing. If Dave had used Claire's go-ahead as cover, or if he had gone behind both our backs, it would explain how my login showed up on the changes. It would also explain why the timing aligned with Carter's audit. I saved the logs, the screenshots, and the emails to a new folder and then copied that folder to a USB drive. I didn't call HR. I didn't call Claire. I didn't tell a soul except Lewis, who replied with a short, "Good, don't do anything crazy." That was the conclusion of the first day. I had evidence and I had a decision to make. I locked the drive in my desk drawer, shut the drawer, and went to bed knowing I couldn't go back to the life I'd had that morning. I woke before my alarm, stared at the ceiling for a long minute, and then sat up with the USB drive in my hand like it was a hot coal. Lewis had sent more raw captures overnight, so I opened my laptop on the kitchen table and started matching timestamps to the work orders I remembered approving. The deeper I went, the cleaner the pattern looked. The rollback requests that Dave had asked for matched the exact times the billing entries changed, and the SSH connections all pivoted through that same small hosted server. At 9, I called Dave. He picked up on the second ring, his voice flat. "Mark, you okay? Explain why your initials are in an outbound key on my server," I said without preamble. A pause long enough that I could hear people in the background. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said finally. "Claire cleared the rollback. Carter's account needed it. Stop spinning." Claire's reply was 2 words, I said. "Make it quick. That doesn't look like clearance for billing adjustments." "I did what needed to be done," he said. "You were the face on the project. You can fix the paperwork if you want." Then he hung up. I tried Claire next. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I left a measured message. I told her I'd found traces that tied the changes to a server outside our network and asked to meet. No return call. At 10:45, an HR rep emailed me and then called. They were escalating Carter's audit. Internal counsel was involved, and given the evidence tying my credentials to the changes, they were moving to terminate. The word termination hit like a physical thing. "We need you to come in and turn in company property," the rep said. "Escort will meet you at security." I drove to the office because I needed to see what this looked like in person. My legs felt detached when I walked through the lobby. People avoided my eyes the way you avoid puddles. Security met me, took my laptop and keycard, and told me an executive would be with me shortly. No one asked what I had. I didn't offer. In the conference room, I told the VP of Operations what I had on the USB. The SSH key with Dave's initials, the rollback emails. The server hops. He listened, expression neutral. When I finished, he pushed his chair back. "Mark, the board has lost confidence. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. You will receive final paperwork by email." They handed me a sealed envelope with HR forms, and when I tried my keycard on the office door, it clicked and denied me. I walked out with my desk stripped bare, except for the folder with my daughter's photo, and the USB drive I had slipped into my pocket before handing over the laptop. Outside, the spring air felt ordinary and small. I sat in my car for 10 minutes with the engine off, the USB drive heavy in my palm. The parking lot hummed with the ordinary sounds of people leaving work. I didn't know anyone who would believe me without proof, and I didn't have time to wait for anyone at the company to do the right thing. At home, I put the USB on the kitchen table and told Jenna everything, starting from Claire's printout and ending with the server hops Lewis had found. She listened without interrupting, folding and unfolding a dish towel the way people do when they need to stay busy while thinking. "Whatever you do," she said finally, "don't let them make you the story without showing the facts." I called Mason that evening. He and I had worked together on an incident response 2 years earlier. He left to do independent cybersecurity consulting. He agreed to meet at a diner near the office. When I handed him the drive, he opened it on his laptop, methodical and silent. He didn't talk much until he had a set of files open and a terminal window running. "These are full server traces," he said. "Not the kind of scrubbed output HR gave you. Look at the gateway hops. They're pivoting through a hosted instance. The SSH key comment with initials is sloppy, but it's tangible. Whoever set this up didn't try to hide the infrastructure." I asked him if the hosted instance could be traced to an owner. Mason ran WHOIS and some passive DNS checks. He sipped his coffee and pushed the screen so I could see. An administrative email appeared on the registrar record. It wasn't an obvious company address. It used a domain that resolved to a small consulting name I hadn't heard. A reverse search pulled up a tiny LLC registered in Ohio, Greenland Solutions. The registration listed a contact who was connected to Dave on LinkedIn. That could be coincidence, Mason said. But it's not a coincidence when you also have rollback requests from Dave's email and SSH keys with his initials. I felt the detail land in me with the clarity of logic. The rollback request I'd saved had Dave's signature line. The email chain to Claire with "Make it quick" was in my folder. If Greenland was tied to Dave or his contacts, there was a potential conflict of interest. It would explain motive, billing adjustments that benefited a vendor who stood to gain from Carter's dissatisfaction. Mason made copies of the raw files, hashed them, and wrote a short integrity note, a plain statement of what he had verified and how. He refused payment beyond a beer and a clear conscience. "Don't do anything stupid," he said, "but don't let them bury this." He gave me a thumb drive with his verification files and a note about chain of custody practices, timestamps, hashes, a record of who touched what. That would matter, he said, if anyone tried to claim the files were manipulated. I spent the next 2 days building a packet. I included the raw logs, Mason's verification note, the rollback emails, and a copy of the WHOIS record for Greenland Solutions. I printed everything and labeled the pages so a non-technical person could follow the thread, timeline, who did what, and where the hosted instance pointed. I also drafted a short cover letter that stated facts and asked Carter to open an independent audit. I didn't use accusatory language. I set out evidence and a request. Before I sent anything, I called one person I trusted outside the company, Rachel O'Neill, the IT manager at Carter. We'd worked with her for 3 years. She knew the system and had always been straightforward. When I told her I had logs that implicated someone inside my former company, she asked me to email the packet and said she'd get it to their legal team and outside auditors. Her tone was careful but not dismissive. "If this is what you say it is, Mark, Carter will want to know. Send it securely." She gave me an encrypted email address. I felt a flicker of relief when the encrypted message left my outbox. Sending it didn't guarantee anything, but it moved the evidence from my drawer into someone who could act. I also called an employment lawyer that night and described the situation in plain terms, asking about my exposure for retaining copies of internal logs. The lawyer's reply was practical. Preserve chain of custody, hand over what is necessary to investigators, and don't distribute beyond investigative channels. By the end of the 3rd day, my small apartment table looked like the command center of a bad plan. Printed pages, 2 thumb drives, a notarized copy of Mason's note, and a queue of sent emails. I kept a copy of everything in my cloud account with explicit timestamps and a directory named Carter Audit, Do Not Delete. The clear conclusion of those first actions was this: I had turned private suspicion into a documented case and placed it with a party who could compel an investigation. It didn't fix my job, and it didn't punish anyone yet, but it changed the playing field. If Carter moved, the company would have to answer questions the board couldn't ignore. When I went to bed that night, I didn't have a plan for the endgame. I had, however, stopped being helpless. The evidence existed outside my head and inside systems that could be forced to show the truth. I woke with my phone already buzzing on the nightstand, an encrypted message from Rachel. "We opened the packet. Legal wants to talk." I put on a shirt, made coffee, and called the number she had attached. "Mark, thank you for sending that," said Corinne Miles, the outside counsel Carter had assigned. Her voice was brisk and exact. "We received raw logs, chain of custody notes, and a WHOIS tie to Greenland Solutions. We're starting a formal audit. I need you to sit for an interview with our auditors and sign an affidavit about how you obtained these materials." "Anything you need," I said. The relief was immediate and practical. Professionals who could compel records were now involved. Corinne added, "We also want to keep this confidential until we have a better picture. If you can, avoid posting or sharing the files." I agreed and arranged to meet the auditors the next morning. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was my employment lawyer, Erin, sounding cautious. "They're preparing a suit against you," she said. "Your former employer has filed a civil complaint alleging unauthorized access and data exfiltration." She sent me a copy of the complaint, terse, legal language accusing me of stealing company property and violating non-disclosure terms. "They're trying to flip the narrative," Erin said. "Don't speak to anyone from your old company. Let Carter's legal team handle communications where necessary. And whatever you do, don't delete anything." The accusation changed the stakes. What had started as an attempt to clear my name now carried a direct legal threat. Erin advised restraint. She arranged to be present when I met Carter's auditors. The audit meeting was formal. 2 auditors, a forensic accountant and Corinne, sat across from me in a windowless conference room. They asked me to walk them through every step: how I discovered the logs, what Mason had verified, and how I prepared the packet. I handed over Mason's verification and the chain of custody note. They copied everything onto secure drives and began asking for third-party records, invoices from Greenline, payment histories from Carter's accounts, and any internal approvals from my old employer. Within 48 hours, the forensic accountant called with the first concrete development. Greenline had billed Carter for integration consulting, tied to a series of change windows around the same dates as the rollback requests. The invoices matched amounts later credited back to Carter as corrections after the billing changes. That pattern by itself could be bookkeeping noise, but the accountant found something else: a sequence of wire transfers from Greenline to a personal account at a small regional bank, labeled as vendor reimbursement. Corinne asked for bank details and then said something that tightened my chest. "We can request a subpoena, but that requires probable cause. If the payments are rooted in a way that ties them to an individual at your former company, we can escalate to criminal referral." I left the meeting with clear instructions: cooperate, stay quiet publicly, and let the auditors trace the money. The auditors moved fast. They sent formal requests for Greenline's billing records and asked that Carter's Treasury Department freeze any suspicious credits pending review. Greenline replied with a lawyered email denying wrongdoing and offering redacted invoices. That reply only confirmed to the auditors that they were on the right trail. 2 days later, I was at home when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Dave standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, face closed like a man trying to appear casual. "Mark," he said, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. "I don't want to talk, Dave." "Come on," he said. "We work together, I can explain." "No explanation can change that my name was attached to those changes," I said. "You put my credentials in those logs." He took a breath. "You took company property, Mark. You took files after you were put on leave. Why are you trying to drag me into whatever you're doing?" I copied stuff to defend myself. I kept my voice steady. "Why did Greenline bill Carter for work that lines up with rollback windows tied to your requests?" Dave's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." We were both shouting more quietly than we wanted to, and Jen appeared from the hallway. Dave left without another word. After he closed the door, I texted him a recording I had of the conversation and saved the timestamp. Erin later told me that recording might be useful if it showed intimidation or contradiction, but she also warned about state wiretapping laws. I had recorded in the state where one-party consent applied, so it was admissible. Meanwhile, the auditor's financial trail began to form into a pattern. The wire transfers from Greenline flowed through an intermediary account and then into an account in the name of a small contractor who had recently been contracted by my former company for implementation oversight. The name matched a contractor Dave had mentioned in passing the previous year. The contractor was a one-person operation, registered the same month Greenline's invoices started appearing. I sent the auditors everything I had that connected Dave to Greenline. The rollback emails, the SSH key comment, the LinkedIn link between Greenline's contact and Dave. They used that material to get a subpoena for Greenline's bank records. When the bank returned the subpoenaed records, they showed a set of transfers that didn't stop at the contractor. A formatted set of payments funneled money to a small family trust linked to a relative of Dave's, and to a vendor account that, on paper, provided no actual services. Karen's next email was short. We have probable cause to refer this to the county prosecutor for criminal investigation. We will also include a civil claim against Greenline and the individuals implicated. Please be prepared to testify. That same week, my former employer did something expected and something more aggressive. They filed a supplemental notice with the civil complaint attaching internal emails that portrayed me as disgruntled and unstable. One email showed I had saved certain logs to a personal account, which they framed as theft. The company also requested a temporary restraining order to prevent me from contacting employees. The legal pressure was now bilateral. I sat with Aaron and Karen in a conference room and went over strategy. Karen wanted Carter's auditors to maintain their chain of custody and to push the prosecutor to open an investigation. Aaron wanted to counterclaim and preserve my rights. This will get loud, Aaron told me, but the financial trail is what matters. If the prosecutor sees transfers to Dave's linked accounts and the rollback requests match the timing, your former employer's allegations won't hold up. Days later, the county prosecutor's office called Karen. They had reviewed the subpoenaed bank records and said they would open a preliminary inquiry. That was a quiet victory. An investigator would now have the authority to compel testimony and additional records. It also meant that my old company could expect criminal scrutiny. The prosecutor's office did what prosecutors do. They gathered every document the auditors and I had produced, served subpoenas, and asked hard questions of people who had been polite to me when I worked there. In the months that followed, Detective Hargrove from the County Fraud Unit took over the criminal side. He reviewed bank records, traced wire transfers, and interviewed the owners of Greenline and the small contractor whose account the money had passed through. Each step tightened the loop between the rollback emails, the hosted instance, and the payments that followed. Detective Hargrove called me to his office twice. The interviews were formal and narrow. He wanted the chain of custody exactly as Mason, and I had documented it, and he wanted to know why I kept copies after HR took my laptop. I told him the truth. I archived the material because I needed to clear my name and because the logs would vanish if I didn't. He asked for the original hashes and the timestamps. He asked for the recording of Dave on my doorstep. He took everything and gave me a case number. That exchange moved my status from suspect in a company memo to a cooperating witness in an active criminal investigation. The prosecutor's team filed charges after the bank records came back showing payments that, while routed through intermediaries, clearly benefited people connected to former employees. The indictment named Greenline Solutions and 2 individuals for conspiracy and wire fraud. Dave was listed as an unindicted co-conspirator at first while the investigators completed their interviews. My former employer, seeing the criminal filings and the auditor's report, narrowed its civil case and withdrew the most aggressive allegations against me. My lawyer negotiated that withdrawal into a formal statement. The company would retract the claim that I had stolen data and would not oppose my cooperation with prosecutors. They did not offer an apology, but the retraction unhooked one major public accusation. Detective Hargrove subpoenaed me to testify in a preliminary hearing to establish probable cause. Sitting under oath and in front of the judge felt formal in a way no office meeting had been. I explained, calmly and precisely, how I found the logs, what Mason verified, and why the timestamps mattered. The defense lawyer for Greenline tried to imply the files had been altered after I left the company, but the hashes and Mason's verification held. The judge found sufficient cause to proceed with the charges. That ruling opened the door for a fuller criminal case. A trial would have taken the better part of a year. Prosecutors prefer guilty pleas when the proof is strong but not ironclad at trial, so they offered plea agreements to the smaller players first. The owner of the contractor accepted a misdemeanor plea and agreed to testify. That testimony, paired with the bank records and the rollback emails, left little room for the company of men who had thought they could hide payments through a web of vendors. Faced with mounting evidence, Dave's lawyer approached me through Aaron and asked if I would talk. I agreed to one mediated conversation in Aaron's office. He wanted me to soften my testimony. He wanted me to say I had saved the files out of paranoia rather than clear intent to document a conspiracy. I refused. I had preserved the chain of custody, and I had been consistent about why I kept the copies. Saying otherwise would have been dishonest and would have risked my credibility. Ultimately, Dave did not go to trial. He accepted a plea deal that admitted to conspiracy to commit wire fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence and an agreement to cooperate in identifying other payments. The deal required him to pay restitution and to forfeit assets tied to the transfers. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in a county facility and 2 years of supervised release. The sentence was neither trivial nor catastrophic, and it matched the prosecutor's sense of proportionality given his cooperation. The owner of Greenline received a similar federal plea and a sentence that included probation and significant restitution. The criminal resolutions affected the civil case. My former employer and I reached a settlement negotiated by Aaron and the company's counsel. They agreed to a lump sum payment to cover lost wages and damages, to provide a neutral employment reference, and to remove the termination from internal systems after a specified review period. The settlement did not restore my old position. The company had moved on, but it cleared my record in a practical sense and provided financial breathing room. Testifying in the prosecutor's office and again in court had been draining. The cross-examinations were precise and often petty, but the facts held. My exhibits, the server logs, Mason's note, the WHOIS records, the bank subpoenas, were admitted into evidence. The county prosecutor credited the documentation I had preserved. The judge and jury never had to imagine motives because the money trail did that work. After the legal dust settled, I did what people do after a long, enforced interruption. I rebuilt. I took a job at a mid-sized company in a different industry that needed someone with experience in product and a healthy skepticism about internal controls. I was candid in interviews about what had happened and about the outcome. The settlement and the prosecutor's filings meant there was a public record that favored my version, and that honesty helped. I kept some of the consulting work I'd done with Mason and began advising small teams on security and documentation practices. What changed for me was less about career and more about how I measured risk. I stopped assuming routine when stakes were high. I started keeping better records for everything that mattered. Jenna and I spent more Saturdays at the park with our daughter. I was at fewer late-night status meetings because I didn't want my life to tilt back toward the slow erosion of time. The scandal had taken months of sleep and a pile of small expenses, but it had also forced a clarity I hadn't expected. The work I did mattered, and it deserved a defensible record. I kept the USB drive in a locked drawer for a while after everything was over, not out of paranoia, but because it had been the axis of this thing. Eventually, I copied the material to encrypted archival storage and shut down the laptop I had used to compile it. I kept the printed packet only until the prosecutor's office returned a letter saying they were closing the investigative files. Then I shredded it. There was no grand vindication speech, no cinematic moment when everyone admitted wrongdoing and the world snapped back into place. Justice, where it arrived, came through paperwork, subpoenas, and a few quiet hearings. The company made process changes, people were disciplined, and Dave paid a price that was real to him and proportional to his role. I lost my job and later found work that fit a different life. I had my name back in any practical sense that mattered to me. My reputation with clients, my ability to earn a living, and the trust of my family. When I look back now, the clearest fact is this. The choice that set everything in motion was small and specific: to save the logs, to verify them, and to pass them to people who could act. That choice made me part of a process larger than my immediate fear. The consequences were messy, legal, and human, but they were real and they were finite. I kept my integrity, paid my dues in courtrooms and meetings, and then returned to work. That felt like an ending I could live with.